The cameras were rolling, the audience was buzzing, and the bright lights of daytime television filled the studio with a familiar energy. Yet, beneath the surface of that cheerful setting, there was tension. Joy Behar, a seasoned host known for her biting humor and sharp political jabs, had come prepared with something she believed would leave Senator John Kennedy cornered, flustered, and perhaps even humiliated. What she didn't know was that this time, her plan would backfire in a way she could never have imagined. It all began when a mysterious email had surfaced, an email supposedly connected to Kennedy, full of words that, if true, could paint him as careless and untrustworthy. Joy had gotten her hands on it just hours before the show, and she saw it as the perfect tool to trap him. The stage was set, the audience would gasp, the headlines would explode, and Kennedy's reputation would take a crushing blow. At least, that was the plan. As the segment began, Kennedy walked onto the stage with his usual calm presence, a warm smile, and a hint of Southern charm that put people at ease. But behind his eyes, there was a steel-eyes, a man seasoned by battles much tougher than television ambushes. He took his seat, adjusted his microphone, and greeted the hosts politely. Joy, meanwhile, was already brimming with anticipation, ready to unleash her gotcha moment. "So, Senator Kennedy," Joy began, her voice dripping with mock sincerity, "before we get into today's topics, I think the American people deserve to hear your explanation for this." She held up a printed email, waving it slightly for dramatic effect. The audience murmured, sensing something big was coming. "This email," she continued, "was leaked this morning. It looks pretty bad. Would you like to read it for USA or should I?" There was a pause, a silence that hung heavy in the air. All eyes turned to Kennedy. Many expected him to stutter, deny, or change the subject. Instead, he leaned forward calmly, his eyes locking with Joy's, and said, "Well, ma'am, since you've already gone to the trouble of printing it out, I'd be happy to read it right here and now." He reached across the table, took the paper from her hand, and began to read. The words spilled out clearly, word for word, with no hesitation. The email spoke of policy frustrations, internal debates, and half-formed sentences taken out of context. But as Kennedy continued, his steady voice revealed something Joy had not expected. The email wasn't scandal also, it was thoughtful. It wasn't damming up, it was human. And it wasn't shameful, it was authentic. By the time he reached the end, the tension in the room had shifted entirely. The audience, once uncertain, now leant forward in silence, hanging on every word. Kennedy folded the paper neatly, set it on the table, and looked directly at Joy. "You see, Joy," he said, his tone both firm and compassionate, "words taken in pieces can sound ugly. But when you read the whole story, when you give people the full truth, it's not so shocking. It's just honesty. And honesty, even when it's messy, is a whole lot better than hiding behind half-truths." Joy tried to interject, but the room wasn't with her anymore. The audience erupted in applause, not for the email, but for the courage Kennedy had shown in reading it openly, without fear. It was a raw moment of transparency, something people longed for in a world where so much was hidden or spun for convenience. But the story didn't end with applause. What followed was even more powerful. Kennedy used that moment to pivot into something larger, a message about trust. He spoke directly to the audience at home, about how Americans deserve leaders who would look them in the eye, admit their flaws, and still fight for them every single day. He reminded them that perfection wasn't the measure of a good leader, character was. The energy in the studio shifted completely. Even some of Joy's co-hosts, who had braced themselves for a fight, found themselves quietly nodding. Joy herself, visibly shaken, tried to laugh it off, but it was clear the moment had slipped away from her. She hadn't trapped Kennedy, he had turned the trap into a stage for truth. Later, the clip went viral. People across the country shared it, not because of political sides, but because it reminded them of something simple yet profound: courage in the face of an ambush, and grace under fire. Kennedy hadn't just defended himself, he had reminded people of what it meant to stand firm with dignity. In the days that followed, commentators called it the masterclass in composure. Some described it as the moment transparency went viral. But for Kennedy, It wasn't about going viral or winning the room. It was about something deeper, showing that no matter how hostile the stage, honesty has a way of cutting through the noise. And so, the story ended not with a scandal, but with inspiration. Kennedy walked away from that studio unshaken, his head held high, proving once again that in a world full of traps and tricks, the strongest weapon is truth spoken plainly. The lesson was clear: when you stand on the side of honesty, no ambush, no leak, and no trap can truly destroy you. And as America watched, they saw not just a politician reading an email, but a man reminding them that integrity still matters,